The devil officer pretends to be cold, but once alone with her, he won't let go of her hand. "Hi there. How have you been? It's good to have you here again, listening to my wonderful story. Before we continue, do well to hit the subscribe icon and also like this video if you find it interesting, and don't forget to drop a comment. Now let's go." The outpost smelled of diesel and dust, a gritty haze clinging to everything. Captain Elias Kane stood at the edge of the command tent, his boots polished to a mirror shine despite the chaos of the war-torn valley. His eyes, sharp as flint, scanned the horizon where smoke curled like a warning. Soldiers saluted as they passed, their steps quickening under his gaze. They called him the devil officer behind his back, not for cruelty, but for the unyielding coldness that seemed to radiate from him. He didn't smile, didn't joke, didn't pause. Orders were given, obeyed, and forgotten. That was his world. Control, precision, survival. His fingers brushed the dog tags tucked beneath his uniform, a habit he barely noticed anymore. His brother Caleb's name was etched there, a weight heavier than the rifle slung across his back. 3 years since Caleb died in an ambush, and Elias had buried everything soft with him. Laughter, hope, the man he used to be. Duty was all that remained, a fortress against the pain. He turned to bark an order, but his eyes caught on something new, a civilian truck rolling through the gates, kicking up clouds of red dirt. Lila Harper stepped out, her nurse's scrubs stark against the outpost's muted grays. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun, strands escaping like they had a mind of their own. She carried a medical bag slung over one shoulder, her steps steady, but her eyes wide, taking in the controlled chaos. Soldiers drilling, medics rushing, the distant thud of artillery. She'd volunteered for this, driven by a need to help, to stitch together what war tore apart. But beneath her calm, her heart raced. She was alone here, far from home, where no one waited for her. Her family had scattered years ago, her mother gone, her father a stranger. Caring for others was her anchor, but it left her hollow. She approached the medical tent, her boots crunching on gravel. A wounded soldier groaned inside, and she quickened her pace, her hands already reaching for supplies. "I've got you," she murmured, kneeling beside him. Her touch was gentle, her voice a soft tether, pulling him back from pain. She didn't notice Elias watching from the tent's entrance, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowing at her ease with the men. Civilians didn't belong here. They broke the order he clung to. "Miss Harper," he said, his voice low, cutting through the tense hum. She looked up, meeting his gaze. His face was all angles, sharp cheekbones, a scar tracing his brow. But his eyes held something she couldn't read. "This isn't a hospital. You follow my orders here." Lila's lips parted, a spark of defiance flaring. "I'm here to save lives, Captain, not to salute." Her voice was steady, but her fingers tightened on her medical bag. The soldier beside her coughed, and she turned back to him, dismissing Elias without a glance. Elias's hand twitched, as if to reach for something. Control, maybe. Her defiance unsettled him, a crack in his carefully built walls. He turned away, the dog tags cold against his chest. She was trouble, a disruption he didn't need. But as he walked back to the command tent, her voice, soft, sure, alive, lingered in his mind. Across the outpost, Lila bandaged the soldier's arm, her hands steady, but her mind racing. The captain's coldness wasn't new. She'd met men like him before, walled off, untouchable. But something in his eyes, grief maybe, had caught her off guard. She shook it off, focusing on the task. She was here to help, not to unravel mysteries. Yet as she worked, the faint scent of lavender from her bag mixed with the outpost's dust, a reminder of the home she'd left behind, and the loneliness she carried with her. Their worlds, so different, were about to collide. The war outside was loud, but the war within them, between duty and desire, fear and hope, was just beginning. The outpost was a beast at night, its pulse a low hum of generators and distant gunfire. Inside the medical tent, the air was thick with antiseptic and sweat. Lila worked late, her hands steady as she stitched a soldier's leg under the flicker of a hanging lantern. The wounded were endless tonight. An ambush had torn through a patrol, leaving chaos in its wake. Her eyes burned from hours of focus, but she didn't stop. Each suture was a promise. You'll live. You'll go home. Captain Elias Kane stood at the tent's entrance, his silhouette sharp against the canvas. He'd come to check on his men, or so he told himself. But his gaze kept drifting to Lila, her quick hands, her soft murmurs to the soldier. She was a disruption, a civilian in his ordered world, yet he couldn't look away. Her presence stirred something he'd buried, something dangerous. "Harper," he barked, stepping inside. "We're short on supplies. Prioritize the critical cases." Lila's head snapped up, her eyes flashing. "I don't need you telling me how to save lives, Captain." Her voice was sharp, but exhaustion softened its edges. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of blood. The soldier groaned, and she turned back to him, dismissing Elias again. His jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being ignored. "This is my outpost. You follow my lead." She stood, her scrubs stained, her face inches from his. "Your outpost, maybe, but these are my patients." Her breath was quick, her eyes locked on his. The air crackled, the lantern's light casting shadows that danced across her face. Elias felt a pull, a current he couldn't name. He should walk away. He didn't. The tent flap rustled as the last medic left, called to another emergency. They were alone now, the world shrinking to the space between them. Lila turned to grab a bandage, but her foot caught on a crate. She stumbled, and Elias's hand shot out, catching her wrist. His grip was firm, calloused fingers rough against her skin. She froze, her pulse racing under his touch. "Don't," she said, but her voice was softer now, almost a plea. She looked up, and his eyes, those flint-sharp eyes, held something raw, unguarded. The devil officer was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he was drowning. He didn't let go. His thumb brushed her wrist, a slow, unconscious motion. The lantern flickered, and her lavender scent mingled with the tense, sterile air. "You're reckless," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "You think you can fix everyone. And you think you can control everything," she shot back, but she didn't pull away. Her hand trembled in his, and she hated how it betrayed her. How his touch made her feel seen, not just needed. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was heavy, loaded with things unsaid. His grip tightened, not possessive but desperate, like he was holding on to something he'd lost long ago. Lila's breath hitched. She saw it then, the grief in his eyes, the weight he carried. It mirrored her own, the loneliness she hid behind her smiles. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "This place, it breaks people." She swallowed, her throat tight. "Maybe I'm already broken." The words slipped out, raw and unfiltered. She hadn't meant to say them, hadn't meant to let him see her like that. But his hand, still holding hers, felt like an anchor. He stepped closer, his boots scuffing the dirt floor. The lantern's light caught the scar on his brow, softening its edge. "You don't belong here," he said, but it wasn't an order. It was a confession, like he was admitting something to himself. "Then why won't you let go?" she whispered, her eyes searching his. He didn't answer. His fingers tightened. Then slowly, deliberately, he released her. But his hand lingered in the air, as if letting go cost him something vital. The moment broke, the tense hum rushing back. Outside, a soldier shouted, and the world reclaimed them. Lila stepped back, her heart pounding. She turned to her patient, her hands moving on instinct, but her mind was still in that silence, in the weight of his touch. Ilias watched her for a moment longer, then turned sharply, his boots heavy, as he left the tent. The night swallowed him, but the warmth of her wrist lingered on his skin. He clenched his fist, trying to erase it, but it was too late. Something had cracked, and the devil officer wasn't sure he could rebuild the walls. Lila pressed a bandage to the soldier's leg, her hands steady, but her thoughts a storm. She'd seen him, the man behind the captain, and now she wasn't sure she could unsee him. The outpost woke to a crimson dawn, the sky bleeding over the jagged hills. Captain Elias Kane stood on the watchtower, his binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning for movement. Reports of an enemy advance had come in at midnight, and the air was thick with urgency. Soldiers checking rifles, medics prepping stretchers, radios crackling. Elias's face was a mask, his orders crisp, but his hand still burned from last night's touch. Lila's wrist, her pulse under his fingers, had lodged in his mind like shrapnel. He shoved the memory down, focusing on the horizon. Control was his shield. He couldn't afford to lose it. Below, in the medical tent, Lila bandaged a soldier's arm, her movements mechanical. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Elias's face, his grief, his hesitation, the way his hand had lingered. It was a mistake, letting him get close. She was here to save lives, not to chase ghosts in a man's eyes. Her fingers fumbled, and the soldier winced. "Sorry," she muttered, forcing a smile. But her chest ached, a familiar loneliness sharpened by last night's spark. She couldn't want him. He was cold, untouchable, a wall she couldn't climb. She glanced outside, where Elias's silhouette loomed on the tower. He was everywhere, inescapable, his presence a weight she couldn't shake. She turned back to her work, stitching a wound with fierce focus. If she kept moving, kept helping, she could outrun the feeling. But her hands trembled, betraying her. Elias lowered his binoculars, his jaw tight. He'd let his guard down last night, a lapse he couldn't repeat. Lila was a civilian, a risk, a reminder of everything he'd buried with Caleb. Love, connection, hope. They were weaknesses in a place like this. He'd seen what happened when you cared too much. You lost everything. He gripped the dog tags under his shirt, the metal cold against his skin. Stay focused, he told himself. The enemy was coming. There was no room for anything else. But as he descended the tower, his boots thudding on the ladder, her voice echoed in his mind. "Why won't you let go?" He clenched his fists, willing the words away. She didn't understand. Letting go meant falling apart, and he'd built his life on holding together. In the medical tent, Lila overheard a medic mention the attack. Her stomach twisted. She'd seen war's cost, shattered bodies, broken spirits, but the thought of Elias out there, leading his men into danger, hit differently. She pushed it aside, grabbing a tray of supplies. He was the devil officer, not her concern. Yet her eyes darted to the tent flap, half expecting him to appear. He did, but not for her. "Harper," he said, striding in, his voice clipped. "We're moving the wounded to the bunkers. Now." His eyes avoided hers, fixed on the soldier she was tending. She nodded, her throat tight. Understood, Captain. But the formality stung. Last night, he'd been a man holding her hand. Now, he was a stranger again. She wanted to ask why, to demand what had changed, but the words stuck. Instead, she helped lift a stretcher, her arms straining under the weight. Elias supervised, barking orders, but her presence pulled at him. Her hair was falling loose again, her scrubs stained with sweat and blood. She moved with purpose, undaunted by the chaos. He hated how it drew him in, how it made him want to reach for her again. Move faster, he snapped, more to himself than her. Lila's eyes flashed, but she bit her tongue. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a fight. Not now, not when the air vibrated with the threat of an attack. She focused on the wounded, her hands steadying as she worked. But inside, she was reeling. His coldness felt like rejection, a reminder of every time she'd reached out and been left alone. Her mother's absence, her father's silence. She wouldn't let Elias do the same. As they moved the last patient, their hands brushed accidentally, reaching for the same strap. Lila pulled back like she'd been burned. Elias froze, his eyes meeting hers for a split second. There it was again, that raw, unguarded look, but he turned away, his shoulders rigid, and strode out of the tent. Lila stood there, her breath uneven. She wanted to hate him, to dismiss him as just another broken soldier. But her wrist still tingled where he'd held it, and that scared her more than the war outside. She was falling, and she didn't know how to stop. Elias reached the command tent, his heart pounding. The enemy was close. He could feel it in the air's weight. But Lila's face, her defiance, her vulnerability, kept breaking through. He gripped his rifle, grounding himself. He couldn't afford to care. Not now, not ever. But as he issued orders, her lavender scent lingered in his mind, a ghost he couldn't outrun. The outpost braced for impact, and so did they, two hearts resisting a pull stronger than either could admit. The outpost was a fortress under siege, but not from the enemy, not yet. A sudden quarantine order came down at dusk, sparked by a suspected infection among the wounded. The medical tent was sealed, its canvas walls now a prison for Lila, Elias, and a handful of medics and patients. The air inside was damp, heavy with the smell of antiseptic and fear. Outside, the world held its breath, the distant rumble of artillery, a reminder of the war waiting to reclaim them. Lila moved between cots, checking fevers, her hands steady despite the knot in her chest. The quarantine was a precaution, but it trapped her with Elias, who stood at the tent's far end, coordinating with a radio that crackled with static. His presence was a weight, his coldness from earlier still stinging. She focused on a soldier's chart, scribbling notes, but her eyes flicked to Elias when he wasn't looking. His shoulders were rigid, his face set, but his fingers tapped the radio, a nervous tick she hadn't noticed before. "Harper," Elias called, his voice cutting through the tent's hum. "We need to ration supplies. Check the inventory." He didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on the radio as if it held all the answers. She bristled but nodded, moving to a crate of bandages and vials. "Yes, Captain," she said, her tone clipped. She wasn't his soldier, but she'd play along, for now. The task was a lifeline, something to keep her hands busy and her mind off the memory of his touch. She counted rolls of gauze, her fingers brushing the rough canvas of the crate, but her thoughts kept circling back to last night. His hand on hers, the way he'd looked like he was unraveling. Elias adjusted the radio, his jaw tight. He'd volunteered to oversee the quarantine, telling himself it was duty. But standing here, with Lila just feet away, he knew it was more. Her presence was a pull he couldn't ignore, like a tide dragging him under. He stole a glance as she worked, her hair falling loose, her scrubs clinging to her sweat-dampened skin. She was steady, capable, but he saw the strain in her eyes. Exhaustion, maybe, or something deeper. He wanted to ask, to know, but the words felt like a betrayal of the walls he'd built. They worked in silence, the tent shrinking around them. A medic coughed, and Lila handed him a mask without missing a beat. Elias passed her a clipboard, their fingers brushing again. This time, neither pulled away. The contact was brief, electric, and Lila's breath caught. She looked up, expecting his usual retreat, but his eyes held hers, storm grey, unguarded for a moment. "Sorry," he muttered, stepping back, but his voice lacked its usual edge. He turned to a crate, lifting it to help her organize supplies. The act was small, practical, but it felt like a truce. Lila swallowed, her throat tight. "Thanks," she said, her voice softer than she meant. They moved together now, stacking boxes, their movements synchronized despite the tension. The air was thick, not just with humidity, but with everything unsaid. Her lavender scent drifted to him, mixing with the tense, sterile tang, and Elias's grip tightened on a crate. He hated how it grounded him, how it made him want to stay. "You don't have to do this," she said suddenly, pausing with a bandage roll in her hand. "You could be in the command tent, not stuck here." He froze, his back to her. "Someone has to keep order," he said, but the words sounded hollow. He turned, meeting her gaze. "And you? Why are you here, risking your life for strangers?" Her lips parted, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. "Because someone has to care," she said quietly, "even if no one cares back." The words hit him like a punch. He saw her then, not just the nurse, but the woman carrying her own wounds. He wanted to say something, to tell her she was wrong, that someone did care. But the radio crackled, pulling him back to duty. He answered it, his voice sharp, but his eyes lingered on her. They worked through the night, side by side, their tasks a fragile bridge between them. When a soldier groaned in pain, Lila knelt beside him, and Elias handed her a syringe without being asked. Their hands brushed again, and this time she didn't flinch. Neither did he. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. Proximity, forcing cracks in their walls. As dawn broke, the quarantine lifted, but the tent felt different now, charged with a quiet understanding. Lila looked at Elias, her heart pounding. He was still the devil officer, still a fortress, but she'd seen the man inside, and Elias, watching her pack away supplies, felt the weight of her words. Someone has to care, settle into his bones. The war outside waited, but in that tent, they were bound, reluctant allies in a battle neither had chosen. The medical tent was quieter now, the quarantine lifted, but the air still held a weight, less from the threat of infection and more from the unspoken truths between Lila and Elias. Dawn's light filtered through the canvas, casting soft shadows on the dirt floor. Lila sorted supplies, her movements deliberate, trying to anchor herself after the night's forced closeness. Elias stood near the tent flap, ostensibly checking a roster, but his eyes kept drifting to her. Their shared tasks had cracked something open, and neither could fully retreat to the distance they'd clung to before. Lila reached into a crate for a bandage roll, but her fingers brushed something cold and metallic. She pulled it out, a pair of dog tags, worn and scratched, tucked beneath a pile of gauze. The name etched on them wasn't Elias's, Caleb Kane. Her breath caught. She glanced at Elias, who hadn't noticed, his back turned as he scribbled on the roster. The tags felt heavy, like they carried a story too big for their small frame. "Captain," she said, her voice low, hesitant. She held up the tags, the chain dangling. "They're yours?" Elias froze, his pen stopping mid-stroke. He turned, his face tightening as he saw the tags. For a moment, he looked like a man caught in a trap, his eyes darting from the metal to her face. "Where did you get those?" His voice was sharp, but it cracked at the edges. "They were in the crate," she said, stepping closer. "Caleb, was he your brother?" He flinched, a small movement, but it was enough. He crossed the tent in 2 strides, snatching the tags from her hand. His fingers brushed hers, and the contact sent a jolt through her. But he didn't pull away this time. He clutched the tags, his knuckles white. "You don't get to ask that," he said, but his voice was raw, more plea than command. Lila held his gaze, her heart pounding. "I'm not asking to pry," she said softly. I see it in you, the way you carry something heavy. I know what that's like." He looked at her then, really looked, and the devil officer was gone. In his place was a man unraveling, his eyes storm grey with grief. He sank onto a crate, the tags dangling from his hand. "Caleb was my younger brother," he said, the words slow, like they cost him. "He died 3 years ago. Ambush. I was supposed to lead that mission, but I sent him instead. I told him it was routine." His voice broke, and he looked away, his jaw tight. "It wasn't." Lila knelt beside him, her hand hovering, unsure if she should touch him. "You blame yourself," she said. Not a question, but a truth she recognized. She'd seen guilt like his in the mirror. Different story, same weight. Elias nodded. "Barely. He wanted to prove himself. I let him. And now—" He held up the tags, the metal glinting in the dim light. "This is all I have left." The silence stretched, heavy with shared pain. Lila's throat tightened. She wanted to look away, to hide from the rawness in his voice, but she couldn't. "I don't have tags," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just memories I wish I could forget." He looked at her, his eyes searching. "What memories?" She hesitated, her fingers twisting together. "My family," she said finally. "My mom left when I was 10. My dad, he checked out after that. I raised myself mostly, learned to take care of others because no one took care of me." Her voice trembled, and she hated it. "I came here thinking I could make a home out of helping people, but it's lonely, you know? Caring when no one cares back." Elias's gaze softened, the tags still in his hand. "You're not alone," he said, the words rough but sincere. "Not here." Her breath caught. It was the closest he'd come to admitting something, maybe not love, not yet, but a crack in his armor. She reached out, her hand resting lightly on his arm. He didn't pull away. The tense hum faded, and for a moment, it was just them, 2 broken people sharing their scars. "You don't have to carry him alone," she said, nodding at the tags, "and I don't have to keep running from home." He looked at her, his eyes holding hers, and for the first time, she saw hope in them, not just for him, but for them both. But the moment was fragile, and the war outside was still there, waiting. A radio crackled, calling Elias back to duty. He stood, slipping the tags into his pocket, but his gaze lingered on her. "Thank you," he said, the words heavy with meaning. He left the tent, his steps slower than usual, as if he was carrying her words with him. Lila sat back, her heart racing. She'd seen his pain, and he'd seen hers. It was a bridge, shaky but real, between their worlds. But the war wasn't done with them, and she wondered if their newfound connection could survive it. The outpost was still at night, the usual hum of generators softened by a rare lull in the fighting. Stars pierced the sky, their light sharp against the endless dark of the valley. Lila stepped out of the medical tent, her shift finally over, her body aching, but her mind restless. The revelations in the tent, Elias's guilt, her own confession, had left her raw, like a wound freshly cleaned. She needed air, space to breathe, but the outpost felt smaller now, charged with his presence. She wandered to the edge of the camp, where a low ridge overlooked the valley. The gravel crunched under her boots, the sound sharp in the quiet. She hugged her arms, the night's chill seeping through her scrubs. Her lavender scent lingered, faint but stubborn, a reminder of who she was outside this war. She closed her eyes, trying to picture home. Not the empty house she'd left, but something warmer, something real. A twig snapped behind her, and she turned, startled. Elias stood there, his silhouette sharp against the camp's faint lights. His uniform was unbuttoned at the collar, a rare lapse in his discipline. His face was softer in the starlight, the scar on his brow less severe. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice low, almost gentle. Leela shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Too much in my head. You?" He stepped closer, his boots scuffing the gravel. "Same." He hesitated, then sat on a nearby rock, gesturing for her to join him. She did, keeping a careful distance, but the air between them felt alive, humming with possibility. They sat in silence for a moment, the stars above them a quiet witness. The cool air carried the faint smell of dust and pine, grounding them. Lila tilted her head back, her hair brushing her shoulders. "When I was a kid," she said, her voice soft, "I used to lie on the roof and count stars. Made me feel like I wasn't so alone." Elias glanced at her, his eyes catching the starlight. "Caleb and I did that too," he said, his voice rough but warm. He'd make up stories about the constellations, said they were warriors watching over us. A faint smile curved his lips, the first she'd seen. It changed him, made him younger, human. She laughed, a soft sound that broke the tension. "Sounds like he was a dreamer." "He was," Elias said, his smile fading, but not gone. "I was the practical one, kept us out of trouble, or tried to." His fingers brushed the dog tags under his shirt, a reflex, but his hand lingered less heavily now. Lila pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "What did you dream of back then? Before all this?" He looked at her, surprised by the question. "Didn't think I had dreams," he said slowly. "But maybe a quiet life, a house somewhere green, someone to come home to." His voice caught, and he looked away, embarrassed. "Stupid, right? In a place like this." "Not stupid," she said, her voice fierce. "That's what keeps us going, the hope for something more." She paused, then added softer, "I dream of a family. Not like the one I had, but one I choose. People who stay." Their eyes met, and the weight of her words settled between them. Elias leaned closer, just enough to feel the warmth of her presence. "You deserve that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Someone who stays." Her breath hitched, and she looked away, her cheeks warming despite the chill. "And you? What do you deserve, Elias?" He flinched at his name, unused to hearing it from her. "I don't know," he admitted. "I stopped thinking I deserved anything after Caleb." His voice was raw, but he didn't hide it this time. "But sitting here, maybe I'm starting to wonder." Lila smiled, a real one, and nudged his shoulder lightly. "Careful, Captain. That sounds like hope." He chuckled, a low, rusty sound that surprised them both. "Don't tell my men. They'll think I've gone soft." "Your secret's safe," she teased, her eyes bright. For a moment, they were just two people, not a nurse and a captain, not broken pieces of a war. The stars above seemed closer, the night kinder, but the moment couldn't last. A distant explosion rumbled, a reminder of the world beyond the ridge. Elias tensed, his hand dropping to his radio, but he didn't move. Not yet. Lila felt it too, the pull of duty, the fragility of this peace. She reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve, a small gesture, but enough to hold him there. "Thank you," she said, echoing his words from the tent. "For this." He nodded, his eyes holding hers. "Don't thank me yet," he said, but his voice was soft, a promise unspoken. They sat there a little longer, the stars their only witnesses, a fragile bond weaving between them, a thread of hope in a world of war. The night shattered with a scream of artillery, the valley erupting in flashes of orange and red. The outpost jolted awake, soldiers scrambling, radios blaring. The enemy had struck, a surprise assault breaching the perimeter. Elias was on his feet in an instant, his moment with Lila on the ridge swallowed by the chaos. His radio crackled with urgent orders. Evacuate the wounded, reinforce the lines. The devil officer snapped back into place, his face a mask of control. But his heart still carried the warmth of her touch, her words. Someone who stays. Lila ran to the medical tent, her boots slipping on the gravel. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid bite of gunpowder. Medics shouted, stretchers clattered, and the wounded poured in, their cries piercing the night. She moved on instinct, triaging patients, her hands steady despite the fear clawing her chest. She'd seen attacks before, but this one felt different. Elias was out there, leading his men into the fire. She pushed the thought down, focusing on a soldier's bleeding arm, but her eyes kept darting to the tent flap. Elias barreled through the chaos, barking orders, his rifle slung across his back. His men moved like extensions of his will, fortifying positions, returning fire. But his mind flickered to Lila, her face under the stars, her quiet hope. He shook it off. Duty came first. It had to. Caleb's death had taught him that. He couldn't afford to care, not when lives depended on him. Yet every explosion felt like a warning. Lose focus, lose everything. A medic burst into the tent, shouting for Lila. "We need you at the front line. Ambulances can't get through." Lila grabbed her bag, her heart pounding. She hesitated, glancing at the wounded, then ran toward the chaos, her scrubs catching on a crate as she moved. Outside, the world was fire and noise, but she spotted Elias near a barricade, directing soldiers. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the war faded. Just them, the ridge, the stars. "Harper," he shouted, his voice cutting through the din. "Get back to the tent. It's not safe." "I can help," she yelled, ducking as a blast shook the ground. "Let me do my job." His jaw tightened, his fists clenching. "Your job is to stay alive," he snapped, stepping closer. His eyes were wild, not with anger, but fear. Fear for her. "Go back. Now." She stood her ground, her voice trembling, but fierce. "You don't get to decide that for me, Elias. I'm not one of your soldiers." Her words carried the weight of last night, the trust they'd built. She was asking him to see her, to trust her, but his face hardened. "I can't lose you too," he said, so low she barely heard it over the gunfire. But before she could respond, he turned away, shouting orders to his men. "Secure the east flank. Move." He was gone, swallowed by the smoke, leaving her standing there, her heart cracking. Lila's breath hitched, her hands shaking as she gripped her medical bag. His words, "I can't lose you," echoed, but his actions cut deeper. He'd pushed her away, chosen duty over her, just like her family had chosen absence over her. The rejection stung, sharp and familiar, reopening old wounds. She wanted to scream, to run after him, but another explosion rocked the ground, and a wounded soldier cried out nearby. She knelt beside him, her hands moving automatically, but tears burned her eyes. She felt unlovable, invisible again. Elias led his men, his voice steady, but inside he was fracturing. He'd seen the hurt in Lila's eyes, the way she'd flinched at his dismissal. He hadn't meant to wound her, but duty was all he knew, his shield against the pain of Caleb's loss. Caring for her meant risking that pain again, and he wasn't strong enough, not yet. His fists clenched as he fired at the enemy, each shot a desperate attempt to bury the guilt, the longing, the fear that he'd just broken something he couldn't fix. The attack slowed, the enemy retreating, but the outpost was a mess, smoke curling, stretchers everywhere. Lila worked through the wounded, her hands bloodied, her heart heavy. She avoided Elias's gaze as he passed, directing cleanup. He wanted to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. He'd chosen duty, but it felt like betrayal, not just of her, but of himself. Lila bandaged a soldier's leg, her movements mechanical. She'd trusted Elias, let him see her scars, and he'd turned away. The loneliness she'd carried for years settled back in, heavier now. She wondered if she'd been a fool to hope for more, to believe in the man behind the devil officer. Elias watched her from a distance, his chest tight. He'd pushed her away to protect her, but he'd hurt her instead. The dog tags burned against his skin, a reminder of what he'd lost and what he might lose again if he didn't find the courage to fight for her. The outpost was a ghost of itself in the aftermath of the attack. Smoke lingered in the air, mixing with the scent of charred metal and blood. Dawn broke, pale and weary, casting long shadows across the rubble-strewn ground. Elias stood alone in the command tent, the silence oppressive after the night's chaos. His hands gripped the edge of a table, the dog tags heavy against his chest. Lila's face haunted him. Her hurt, her defiance, the way she'd looked at him like he'd broken a promise. He'd pushed her away, chosen duty over her, and now the weight of it crushed him. He sank into a chair, his eyes falling on a crumpled map. Caleb's voice echoed in his mind, from years ago, under a different sky. Live, Elias. Don't just survive. He'd ignored those words after Caleb's death, building walls to keep the pain out. But Lila had slipped through, her warmth cracking his armor. He'd hurt her, to protect himself. But it felt wrong. She wasn't Caleb. She was here, alive, and he'd pushed her away when she'd asked for trust. He rubbed his face, exhaustion and guilt warring within him. Could he reach out now, after shutting her out? Did he deserve to? Across the outpost, Lila sat on a cot in the medical tent, her hands idle for the first time in hours. The wounded were stabilized, the medics resting, but she couldn't. Her heart was a storm. Anger, hurt, and something deeper, something she hadn't dared name until now. Elias's words, "I can't lose you too," had lit a spark of hope, but his rejection had snuffed it out. It was her childhood all over again, reaching for love, finding only absence. She twisted her fingers, her nails digging into her palms. She'd let him in, shared her scars, and he'd turned away. Was she a fool for wanting him still? She stood, pacing the tent, her boots scuffing the dirt floor. Her lavender scent clung to her, a faint reminder of who she was outside this war. She'd come here to help others, to find purpose. But Elias had given her something else, a glimpse of connection, of home. Now it felt like another loss. She stopped, her eyes falling on a soldier's letter to his wife, left on a crate. "I'm coming home, no matter what," it read. The words hit her hard. She'd spent her life caring for others. But what about her? Could she fight for what she wanted, even if it meant risking more pain? Outside, Elias walked the perimeter, his steps slow, deliberate. The outpost was quiet, but his mind was loud. He passed the ridge where they'd sat under the stars, and the memory stopped him cold. Her laugh, her quiet dream of a chosen family. He'd wanted to be part of that, he realized, but fear had stopped him. Fear of losing her, fear of failing her like he'd failed Caleb. His hand brushed the dog tags, and for the first time, they felt less like a burden and more like a reminder. Caleb had wanted him to live, not just endure. He turned toward the medical tent, his heart pounding. He had to see her, to say something, anything, to fix what he'd broken. But doubt gnawed at him. What if she'd closed herself off, like he had for so long? What if he was too late? Lila, meanwhile, stood at the tent's entrance, her arms crossed, staring at the horizon. She'd decided to find him, to demand answers, to know if what they'd shared was real. But fear held her back. Fear of rejection, of being unlovable. She took a step, then stopped, her breath uneven. "Get it together," she muttered, clenching her fists. She wasn't a child anymore, waiting for someone to choose her. She could choose herself. As she stepped out, she saw him, Elias, approaching the tent, his face shadowed, but his eyes fixed on her. They froze, the distance between them a chasm filled with everything unsaid. The air was heavy, the outpost's hum fading to a dull roar in their ears. "Lila," he said, his voice rough, almost breaking. He stepped closer, his hands open. No rifle, no armor, just him. "I was wrong. Last night, I pushed you away because I was scared. I'm still scared." Her heart raced, but she held her ground, her eyes searching his. "Scared of what, Elias? Of me? Or of yourself?" "Of losing you," he said, the words raw, unfiltered. "Like I lost him." He touched the dog tags, his hand trembling. "But I can't keep running from this. From you." Lila's throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, but the hurt lingered. "You hurt me," she said, her voice shaking. "I trusted you, and you shut me out." "I know," he said, stepping closer, his eyes pleading. "And I'm sorry. I want to try, Lila, if you'll let me." She looked at him, the man behind the devil officer, and saw the truth in his eyes. Fear, hope, love. She had a choice. Walk away, protect herself, or take the risk. Her hand twitched, wanting to reach for him. But she hesitated, the weight of her past holding her back. The outpost was still, the dawn's pale light softening the scars of the night's battle. Smoke curled lazily from the rubble, and the air carried the faint tang of gunpowder. But the war felt distant now, a backdrop to the quieter battle unfolding between Elias and Lila. They stood outside the medical tent, the space between them no longer a chasm, but a fragile bridge, trembling with possibility. Elias's eyes, storm gray and raw, held hers, his apology still hanging in the air. "I want to try, Lila, if you'll let me." Lila's heart pounded, her hands clenched at her sides. His words were a lifeline, but fear clung to her, fear of trusting, of being left again. Her past whispered, "You're not enough. They always leave." But Elias wasn't her mother, her father. He was here, standing before her, his armor gone, his vulnerability bare. She took a shaky breath, her eyes tracing the scar on his brow, the dog tags glinting at his collar. He was a man who'd lost everything, yet he was choosing her. "I don't know how to do this," she said, her voice low, trembling. "Letting someone in. It's hard. I've been alone so long." Elias stepped closer, his boots scuffing the gravel. "So have I," he said, his voice rough but steady. "But I don't want to be anymore. Not with you." Her eyes stung, and she looked away, the horizon blurring. The outpost hummed faintly, soldiers moving, radios crackling, but it faded, leaving just them. She wanted to run, to protect the heart she'd guarded for years, but his honesty anchored her. He wasn't promising perfection, just effort, and that was enough. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and firm, just like that night in the tent. The memory flooded back, his grip, her pulse racing, the moment they'd first seen each other's truth. But this time, it wasn't a spark, it was a vow. He didn't let go, and neither did she. "I'm scared too," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I want this. Us." Elias's face softened, a faint smile breaking through, the kind that changed him from the devil officer to the man she'd glimpsed under the stars. "Then we'll figure it out," he said. "Together." He pulled her gently closer, and she didn't resist. Her head rested against his chest, the dog tags cool against her cheek, Caleb's name a silent witness to their new beginning. His heartbeat was steady, a rhythm she could trust. Her lavender scent mingled with the dust on his uniform, a mix of her world and his, no longer separate. The war was still there, its shadow looming, but in this moment, they were stronger than it. Elias's hand brushed her hair, his touch tentative, like he was learning how to hold something precious. "I thought I'd lost this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The part of me that feels alive." Lila tilted her head up, her eyes meeting his. "You didn't," she said, her voice fierce with conviction. "You're here, and so am I." They stood there, wrapped in each other, the outpost fading to a hum. A soldier passed, glancing their way, but saying nothing. The war didn't stop, but it didn't own them anymore. Lila felt the weight of her loneliness lift, replaced by something new. Hope, fragile, but real. Elias felt it too, the guilt of Caleb's loss softening. Not gone, but no longer a cage. He'd chosen love, and it hadn't broken him. It had made him whole. "I want to build that house," he said suddenly, his words spilling out. "The one I told you about, somewhere green, with you." Lila laughed, a soft, surprised sound that warmed the air. "You're getting ahead of yourself, Captain," she teased, but her eyes were bright, her hand squeezing his. "But I'd like that, a home, with you." They stepped back, still holding hands, their fingers laced as if letting go would break the spell. The outpost stirred, soldiers preparing for the next mission, but Elias and Lila were different now. They'd faced their fears, his guilt, her abandonment, and chosen each other. The war would go on, but they'd face it together, their bond a light in the dark. As they walked back to the medical tent, Elias's thumb brushed her wrist, a quiet echo of that first night. "Stay close," he said, his voice soft but sure. "Always," she replied, her smile a promise. The valley stretched before them, scarred but enduring, like their hearts. They didn't have all the answers, but they had this, a love found unexpectedly, a redemption neither had dared to hope for. And as the sun rose, painting the sky gold, they knew it was enough. If you enjoyed this story, please drop a comment and hit follow, subscribe. See you tomorrow.